very happy to take questions. Might say who you are.
Thank you. Chris Mason, BBC News. A suspected rapist awaiting trial has been mistakenly set free from prison and has fled the country. How on earth did this happen? What's happened to those extra checks you promised to try and prevent this kind of thing from happening? And what are you doing to bring him back to the UK? Thank you.
This was brought to my attention a few days ago. The police are working at pace to ensure that he returns to the country. As you know, I did set in place checks both in prison and in courts. This is an error in the courts system, and Dame Lynn Owens is about to report shortly so that we can deal with the system we inherited. Under the last system, 860 prisoners were released in error. It is because of the prison capacity crisis that I outlined in my system and very junior staff who are dealing with these issues. We've got to bear down. This is unacceptable, not just to the public, but most importantly, the victims of crime who go through extra stress when these errors occur, largely because we've got a paper-based system. We've got to move into a digital age, which is what I've outlined in the court system, which will alleviate those pressures over time. Thank you for the question.
Hi, Sophie Huskisson from The Mirror. So we saw some MOJ modelling that shows your reforms will start to make a difference on the backlog in 2028. Do you have any fears that another political party, such as Nigel Farage's Reform UK, could come in after a general election in 2029 and undo everything that you've implemented? Thank you.
These reforms, which I've outlined, and which Sir Brian and his team reflected on with such deliberation, make it absolutely clear there is no silver bullet. If we want to see those graphs falling, we have to put money into the system, which we're doing. We have to have the modernisation and deal with the inefficiencies, which we're doing, but we've also got to ensure that we've got reform, frankly, because of the huge demand that's now in the system. We've got to do all of it. And if we step back from any one of those things, we will see that backlog continue to rise to over 200,000 cases. My determination is to see that come down by the next general election and the end of this parliament, and then to see it reduce to much more acceptable levels as we get into the next election cycle up to 2035. And I would encourage all colleagues to look closely at the bill when it's published and to look closely at both the equality assessments that go alongside that bill, to look at the data and to understand the seriousness of this challenge and why, if we are serious about centering victims of crime, particularly vulnerable victims of crime, that we have to now press forward with all of these measures as a package, as we've been asked to do by Sir Brian and his team.
Hi there, Amy Gibbons here from The Telegraph. Thanks very much. David, your Victims Commissioner has just told me that Labour MPs who try and block the jury trial reforms will be putting the public at risk unless they come up with an alternative plan. Do you agree with that? And one MP in particular has threatened to resign and trigger a by-election if you push ahead with this. Do you think that's a price worth paying for these reforms?
Well, look, I recognise that there are some who are very focused on the element of these reforms that are about a threshold change, particularly for juries. But I do emphasise it's a threshold change, that 90% of cases in our countries are tried by magistrates. And I do just say that I do think it's acceptable for any government of the day to make the determination as where the threshold should be, just as Margaret Thatcher did back in the late 80s on where criminal damage and theft of a vehicle should sit. Should it sit in the magistrate's court or should it sit in the Crown Court? And I think most of the public would accept that if you stole an iPhone on your way out of this building from Curry's, or perhaps from a Microsoft store, that can be dealt with by a single judge. You don't need a trial that goes on for several days. That's the efficiency, that's the reform, that's what the new Crown Court Bench Division will bring. And I hope that all MPs will now reflect on the detail and recognise that this is a package that we must do if we're going to stand up and support victims and see that backlog come down. Who's next?
On that same point, Lord Chancellor, we have legislated so that summary trials must go, summary offences must go to A, indictable offences must go to B, and yet and the indictable ones are very serious, and there's no choice for a person charged with murder to go anywhere else but where legislation sends it. And in the middle is a sort of low to moderate level of offending where someone can choose. Normal behaviour, obviously, is you choose the place that's likeliest to acquit you. But is it anything more, really, than a sort of punt on the wheel of fortune? Because there has never been any research that shows that jury is fairer. And if that is his choice, then it costs 7 times, according to the CPS, more money for the taxpayer to try the same offence in the Crown Court. It pushes back the resolution for his victim many years instead of months. And of course, it pushes back another list of victims who are going to follow him to the Crown Court, but on really serious cases that they can't get out of the Crown Court about: rape, murder. So we have 2 sets of victims pushed back by this choice, which really is only a punt, isn't it, at who will be fairer. There is nowhere else, apart, I believe, from the island of Jersey, that currently allows this kind of election. Isn't it time we just legislated? If it's this kind of case, you go there. It's the ones at the bottom, you go there. And in the middle, we legislate too. You go to a clear part of the Crown Court, as Leveson proposes.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and it goes to the heart of the problem. If we did nothing and we just continued to see this trend up to 200,000 as we headed into the 2030s, or indeed as we did a little bit of it and didn't see substantial change, what continues is defendants gaming the system. What continues is trials lasting longer. And obviously, you will get defendants who know that they can plead guilty at the very last stage because victims fall out, witnesses forget, the case collapses. And at the moment, as Sir Brian demonstrated, the rate of cases collapsing is intolerable. We've got to do something about it. And for that reason, the ability for the defendant to elect where they're going has got to come to an end. And so we are introducing more powers for the judiciary to make the right determination. It's actually determination that Crown Courts make in terms of what should be appealed or go up to the Court of Appeal, a proper permission stage that properly assesses, everyone can see it and understand why something has been granted appeal or where it should appropriately sit. But I maintain that where that threshold falls and where magistrates can do more, up to 18 months, 2 years, what the new Crown Court Bench Division can do up to 3 years will be speedier and quicker by definition because you're not convening a jury. That's what I saw in Canada. Now, our estimation is the same as Brian's, about 20% quicker and more speedier. But actually, I have to say, when I spoke to Canadian colleagues, they wanted to emphasise to me that they thought that was a conservative estimate. Their system sees much quicker throughput as the system begins to bed in. All of that ensuring that the victim in more serious cases murder, manslaughter, rape, sexual violence, has a speedier experience of the system, remembering that back in 1971, and Sir Brian showed me the figures on this, often defendants are waiting 6 months for their child to come on. Well, that experience is a long, long way from where we are today, and our ambition should be to get back to the system as it was created.
Thank you. Carl Dinnan from ITV News. The investment that you are announcing today, is that something that you hope will result in savings down the line, or do we and the Treasury simply have to get used to a well-funded court system costing more? And different subject, did you, as reported, advise the Prime Minister not to hire Peter Mandelson?
Well, on the first point, this is about record investment. Many have argued that we need more sitting gays in our courts. That's why I've uncapped them. And I'm pleased. It became very normal in our system for education and health secretaries to announce more investment, far rarer for justice secretaries to announce more investment. So I am the first for a very long time to announce more investment in our courts, and that trend has got to continue if we're serious about bearing down on this problem and seeing that backlog come down. The Prime Minister has apologised for the appointment of Peter Mandelson. His former Chief of Staff has stood down and taken responsibility for that appointment. As Foreign Secretary at the time, of course, I was subject to collective responsibility, and I am sorry that that decision was made.
Good afternoon. My name's Katie Kempen. I'm Chief Executive of Victim Support. We give information and support to hundreds of thousands of victims each year. I'm asking a question on behalf of the Victims Commissioner. She shares many of our concerns. She recently asked victims, knowing what they know now, would they report a crime again? Every single victim she spoke to said no, and that also reflects much of our experience. So please, can you give reassurances on two things? First, that your reforms will genuinely cut the court backlog and end the years-long wait for justice. And second, that you will reform a system that victims say is re-traumatising them and stacked against them.
Well, thank you for the question. And victims saying, "I wish I hadn't bothered," is unacceptable. For democracies to function successfully, it is hugely important that when we collectively experience any offensive criminal behaviour as a society, that we see in good time the person who's committed the crime experiencing a sanction from the state, and the victim being able to lift their head up high and be content that justice has been delivered. And democracy breaks down, frankly, if that isn't the place that you're in, partly because the offender continues to reoffend and victims give up reporting the crime, and you get sort of chaos. We cannot allow that to happen, and it's my first duty as Secretary of State, building on the work of my predecessor, to make sure that the system is better on behalf of those people. This conversation now enters Parliament. It enters our democratic chambers, where there will be heated debate about what the government is proposing. And I hope that we centre victims in that debate. And I have observed that sometimes the debates have sounded quite patrician, quite old-fashioned, quite male, forgetting often that the victims of crime are often vulnerable, often minorities, sadly children, and very often women. And we have to keep them in the front of our minds.
Hi, thank you. Thanks very much. Amelia from Politico. You talked about your unlimited funding for next year for the courts, but there are some quite specific numbers in it. I actually can't find it now, but it was something like 240 million or something extra next year compared to this year, which isn't unlimited. Obviously, it's capped and it includes maintenance as well. So it's not unlimited, is it? Or have you managed to somehow get Rachel Reeves to actually write a blank cheque for funding next year?
It's 2.78 billion. Sitting days uncapped, and the commitment to sit as much as capacity will allow in our courts, understanding that when I say that, what it means is if we were in the NHS and you wanted more operations, one knows that you've got to get the consultants, the nurses, everyone in the theatre to work in that building. In the same way, I've got to get the barristers, the solicitors, the court clerks, the judges, everyone in the right place, the prisoner, to reach that capacity. What the Lady Chief Justice has been clear to me on is that she wants to do more, the judiciary wants to do more. I know that barristers want to do more, and I'm saying I will find the money for you to do more, and I'm very confident that over the next 3 years, because also the certainty of funding is really important, the system will actually do considerably more, and we will be sitting more than we have in our country for a generation. So that's where we've got to get to. And then at the same time, we've got the court maintenance backlog is extraordinary because we've got holes in the roof and leaks and some courtrooms that are not in use because they're not fit for purpose. And that's why finding the extra money for the capital spend on court maintenance was also important. This is the beginning of a journey. We will need to find more funds as the spending reviews continue, and that is my commitment to seek to do that.
Last question, David Maddox. Lord Chancellor, David Maddox from The Independent. You'll be aware there's substantial opposition to this on your own benches. And we've seen, really in the recent past, a number of U-turns by this government on big issues, including welfare reform and others, because of pressure from your own backbenches. Can you guarantee that this is not going to be another one of this government's U-turns? And why won't you listen to suggestions from Carl Turner and others that you could put a sunset clause in on some of these changes for when the backlog is cleared?
Well, of course I've listened and reflected and consulted with members of Parliament, including in my own party, as you would expect. It is important to emphasise that, and I was with a group of MPs just yesterday, absolutely supportive and determined to see us push through and press ahead with these reforms. And many of them former barristers, solicitors, many of them victims of crime themselves, many of them standing up for victims groups in their own constituencies, understanding the importance of the whole package of reform. Many colleagues have said, look, David, you've got to find more money for the courts. Today I've announced that we found more money for the courts. Many of them have said, look, there are huge inefficiencies. You've got to get prisoners to court on time. You've got to fix the court maintenance backlog. Today I've announced fixing that backlog and getting those prisoners to court on time. Some of them have suggested that if we did those two things, we wouldn't need court reform. And I'm really clear that when they look at the data, when they look at the evidence, as Sir Brian did in detail, they will accept and understand that we have to do all three of these changes, and it is right that government makes this threshold change particularly so that up to 3 years we see those cases move more swiftly through the system. And we'll have that debate as we enter Parliament. I do accept that some former colleagues at the bar have stood against this small part of the reforms. Very pleased to see the Bar Council and the Law Society support our reforms this morning. Very pleased to see that. But of course, the Bar Council particularly has been particularly focused on this jury change, and we will continue to discuss this with them. I would just say this, having qualified as a barrister back in 1995, it can sometimes be a conservative profession with a small c. The bar opposed changes to the double jeopardy rule. Those changes to the double jeopardy rule are what delivered partial justice for the Lawrence family. The Bar Council opposed, I remember at the time, they opposed giving solicitors greater advocacy rights. I think that's been an important change, and I actually want to see more solicitors, particularly able to become judges in our system, because there's real diversity amongst our solicitors across the country. So we'll continue to have the debate, but I would say now, look at all of this in its entirety, look at what we're proposing and centre the victims, and you'll understand why we're making the changes we're making. Thank you very much indeed.